What's up, StaleMates? We got a very special guest today, a very good friend of mine, legend in the game, legend in the media game. He's been around for the longest time. I'll pretty much let him introduce himself. My good friend, Scott Casber. How's it going, Scott?
I'm good, Zach. Good talking with you. Thanks for inviting me on StaleMates. I've been enjoying all that you've put out so far. Most recently, the meme that you put out with Pat Downey and that ever unfolding saga that is Pat Downey. Love that passion, but boy, I tell you what, sometimes I got to wonder what he's thinking. But you did an outstanding job chronicling uh, day and date, time and time, the events as they unfolded. I thought it was rather interesting the way you did it, but boy, what a lot of fun.
Yeah, thank you for all those. First off, but yeah, the wrestling gods have really blessed me with a lot of entertainment this summer. Perfect timing for the show. A lot of the stuff that we're doing, we're covering like the drama around the sport of wrestling. Um, and memes is just one outlet to kind of do that. Let's start from the beginning. Kind of tell us how you got started in the media game. Did you start off in radio, or how did you get involved in wrestling media wise?
Actually, it's weird. I started in television in 1975 and then morphed into sports announcing, live event announcing, whether it's wrestling, football, baseball, basketball, soccer, fights. Um, and I knew at some point, having gone to college, being the first one in my family to go to college, I was able to go to the University of Iowa after broadcasting school. And one of the guys that kept me in school, one of the couples, anyways, Dan and Kathy Gable, they made me an opportunity or gave me an opportunity to not just stay in school, but gave me a safe haven. That was the University of Iowa wrestling room where I became friends with the Bannocks and Randy Lewis's and Royce Algers and guys of that ilk. And I'll tell you what, it was a neat group because it's a very tightly bonded group. So it gave me a home away from home and an opportunity to be involved in something bigger than just me on a college campus of 40,000 plus. So it was a very unique opportunity, and I was able to maintain my broadcast position and my public position as an announcer over there as well, being a DJ on campus, doing lots of parties, maybe too many parties, if you know what I mean.
Let's go.
But we had so much fun.
Yeah, that's awesome. I know when I first met you, you told me that you were Herky the Hawkeye back in the day. Do I remember that right?
That is true. 83, my fraternity, which is Delta Tau Delta, uh, part of their responsibility at the time was uh, wearing the Herky mantle. We had different outfits for different sports. And being the older of the two, having gone back to school, the older of the five, there are five members of the Herky committee,
Hmm.
and I was able to choose the sports and events that I wanted to be involved with. I chose parades, first half of football games for the obvious reasons. Back then, you could drink, and the second half is a much better place to be.
Yeah.
And the uniform smells a lot better in the first half than it does the second half of every football game.
Yeah, that second guy, he's got to get all your sloppy seconds, all the sweat and
Amen.
everything.
And
Did the Herky the Hawkeye outfit get you access to certain things on campus that other kids might not have had?
sure, dating was amplified in a big way. So an awful lot of girls who find out who's sad, who needs a shoulder to lie their head on, and who wants to be friends.
Is that still on your resume today, or you just leave
No,
that out?
no, that's definitely not on my resume today. I'm happily married, and Herky, while it's part of my past, is definitely in my past, and I know that the kids at the University of Iowa and every other college campus take us very seriously, and it's quite an honor to represent the universities that the mascot serves. But in my case at Iowa, it was a very neat opportunity to be a part of a very select group of individuals to help solidify and cement the fans and the team that's in play, whether it's a wrestling team or a basketball team or what have you.
So you started off in TV, you said in 75, correct?
75, yeah.
And then
I was I was underneath a guy named Bill Riley. We had an internship program in high school, and four walls. I wasn't comfortable with it confining me, so I looked for opportunities to lead in the practical world, and that was through an internship program. And I chose a guy named Bill Riley, Mr. State Fair,
Yeah,
and
let's
he
go.
he 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 taught me. He taught me everything I needed to know about TV at the time. Made sure that I selected broadcasting in school. Immediately after high school, I graduated a half year early, and I was done with school by midsummer,
Hmm.
and before most kids had even started college. So I was well on my way to the fabulous career in broadcasting, which I found at the time did not pay real well.
Yeah.
So that precipitated my desire to go back to school and expand my careers.
Okay, so you finished the broadcasting stuff. You said you went back to school so you could, broaden your career.
Right.
What was the next step? Was the next step radio?
Well, no, the radio I had in the bag. So I already had an associate's degree in broadcast. After that, I went on for general studies in areas that interested me, which it turns out, after doing 3 years at Iowa and finishing at Drake, it turns out once I got to Drake, the people at Drake said, "Hey, it looks like you're here for a degree in PR." So you have minors in advertising, marketing, and then your major would be PR, public relations. And then you marry that with that education you already have, and it gives you an opportunity to not only understand business, but be able to hopefully skip over all the mistakes that are made by most in developing a business model, enacting a business model. And I've had many different businesses, but the most fun I've ever had is interacting with and supporting the sport of wrestling.
Mm,
Mixed martial arts came along naturally because there's so many wrestlers that have gone on to extensive and successful careers in mixed martial arts.
yeah. Can you talk about some of the early days? Were you doing interviews with in the MMA world in the early days of the UFC? Because it's a fairly relative sport.
Right.
Were you around in that early time period?
I was. The guys, and knowing who I was made my job a lot easier. So when you call up somebody like a Pat Miletich or Tim Sylvia, Jens Pulver, Spencer Fisher, Little Evil, it didn't matter who it was, but those guys who made their home in the state of Iowa, it was much easier to reach out from to them. They in turn would introduce you to other MMA talent, and realistically, your desire, our desire as an industry, is to develop a Rolodex that enables you to call guys for their opinions, for interviews on your radio and TV shows, and to really connect. They know after getting to know you that you have no axe to grind. All your entire job, as I see it anyway, it was for me, was to promote them and promote the sports in such a way where these weren't necessarily the bad guys.
Right.
These were guys that were just exercising the talent one step further from collegiate or international style wrestling, both Greco, freestyle. And then early on, we also identified the need for the sport to have women's wrestling. Too
Hmm.
many of the old guard coaches were dead set against having women's wrestling. We knew that if we had women's wrestling on every college campus, that it would be an athletic director that was brave indeed, who would choose to eliminate a men's program, because
Hmm.
if he did so, then naturally there would be an imbalance of men's and women's opportunities.
Mm.
And that's basically what Title IX spells out: an opportunity for women to excel in sports and receive college degrees. That is generally the benefit for a job well done on a college campus. But we were able to identify that early and beat that drum soundly for 18, 19 years. When we started, there was barely a USA effort. A couple weights contended, but really didn't contend for any national or international titles. There was sprinkling, maybe three or four college programs, and maybe even double that at the high school level, but no national or statewide championships and conversely, even after that, national championships. Now we're seeing, well over 60, 65, maybe even 70 at this point, women's college
Hmm.
programs. And those were the needed feeder programs to help USA Wrestling in its overall desire to field a national team that could compete internationally around the world. And it's been very successful, at times rated one, two, or three in the world, only behind the Japanese and one other country, and insert country here, as they continue to do well. It's interesting, while we saw it early as a need politically to satisfy a need to add women's wrestling,
Hmm.
but now we're seeing it being a strong underpinning for the sport itself. We're seeing that wrestling, in and of itself, can be a very healthy um, addition to any athletic department. Athletic directors look at this and say that, well, it's a really affordable winter sport. And most programs, their desire is to be self sufficient and not be a drawdown, if you will, economically in an athletic department, but to be able to contribute. As well as I do, Penn State, Iowa State, Virginia Tech to a degree, and NC State, Michigan, others like that, are able to cover their costs. And they're also populated with great donors who believe that the education and the experience they had on that college campus is worthwhile to continue to invest in. Princeton University comes to mind, Rutgers
Hmm.
comes to mind as programs that are well funded by athletic directors, by donors, helping those athletic directors take wrestling and see it in a different light. It's no longer a hindrance to an athletic department; it's a positive, and that's what's really important.
Yeah, that's a lot to take in right there. I think I did the best that I could of comprehending all that. Do you think that when you look at women's wrestling from, you just said you were there in the early days to now, do you think that the coverage is better, or do you think there's more room for everybody to, help them out and help them get more exposure that they need?
I really do think that's key, Zach, and I'm glad you asked that because it gives an opportunity to expand not just for the participants, but for the coaches as well. Terry Steiner has done a remarkable job taking over and mastering what has now become USA Women. Uh, First of all, the talent level, the pool to draw from is remarkable. Whether you have a Helen Maroulis or a Jenna Burkert or insert name here that are floating amongst the top ranks in their weight classes. I think what you're saying is America is better prepared to compete on the international level with countries where women's wrestling has dominated from age 5 or 6 and thereabouts on up to that competitive level internationally. You're seeing the Team USA be in a much better position to compete for international titles. And that's what it's about. Let's face it, that's where the money lives. If you look at the money that's allocated for the Living the Dream Medal Fund, for example, or the corporate donations that go or that come when somebody wins an Olympic gold, silver, or bronze, or a world championship. Jordan Burroughs comes to mind, a young man who has benefited greatly. Kyle Snyder's another, Helen Maroulis. We're looking at some individuals that are really making very good money. And let's face it, this is a really small window for these high level athletes. They've wrestled a good majority of their life. The icing on that cake that is their life, the icing is that international opportunity to obtain the medals that they seek and the money that comes along with it. And we want to see them successful because as they're successful, it's a natural attractant to other athletes to continue to aspire to greatness.
Yeah. I think, it was like back in 2014, they announced that they were going to try and take wrestling out of the Olympics, which of course we all, that was terrible. That was a bad time. And
It was.
wrestling did a really good job of rallying together and saying like, hey, we need to look at ourselves and what should we change. And, there's rule changes that were made. There were certain things that we did to kind of improve ourselves and say, hey, we are ready to make a change and hopefully help out each other. Do you see and then they end up reinstating it into 2020. Do you see those changes? And do you think that we're on the right path to keep the wrestling in the Olympics for a long time?
I do. At that time, wrestling had its blinders on, if you will, because we thought we were an untouchable sport, being one of the original sports in the Olympic program, dating back to the ancient games. And I was very much involved with the. Uh, as soon as we knew of the challenge, we got on Skype. We interviewed 20 to 30 people a day. And I'm talking about movers and shakers, donors, athletes, coaches. Nobody was off limits to us. I remember one day, I think we interviewed 7 gold medalists in one day and an equal number of silver and bronze medalists. But we got on the bandwagon early to be a proponent. We gave away all those interviews to local media outlets around the country, so the local stations who were not well trained in covering our sport or even knowing our athletes as we know them. I mean, let's face it, a guy like Jordan Burroughs, or let's maybe even go with Giangelo Hancock and Greco, for example. These guys are phenomenal interviews. I mean, they are well educated, dedicated athletes, nice people, and easily coachable. And that's one of the things. You look at Henry Cejudo, for example. His story all by itself created enough interest for Jay Leno to have him on the Tonight Show. I think it's 5 or 6 times. Leno loved Henry, and what's not to love? The story of him fighting for ice cream on the mean streets of South LA. I think that is a phenomenal story. And people need to hear stories like that because that's when you inherently begin to understand, accept, and embrace. Once you call wrestling your own and wrestling recognizes that, then I'll give you an example. Barb over it, and I'll not use her last name, but Barb for the Hawkeye Wrestling Club has done a outstanding job of keeping the public apprised. And follow her on Facebook, folks. Keeping people apprised of what's going on with the Hawkeye Wrestling Club, what's going on with individual wrestlers. My position in the broadcast community, knowing everybody as I do, some more than others. But generally speaking, when I call for an interview, when and where you want me on the show, you want an individual standalone interview on Skype or whatever platform it is, much like we're using today, Zoom. Uh, Technology, when we started, we weren't able to easily and affordably stream. I remember our first streaming of the NCAA championships many years ago cost $11,000 worth of bandwidth for the 3 days, 6 sessions.
Wow.
So we've learned the hard way in many regards, but I think we've grown. I think our sport has benefited from it. My absence for the last year or so from the airwaves has only made the heart grow fonder, to use a well-worn phrase, but one that is applicable no less. I believe that the sport still needs people like me, people like you, Zach, who are doing a remarkable job to explore the boundaries of the new technologies and get it out there. The YouTube channels and the Facebook posts, the Twitters, the tweets that are out there, the ones that you are doing, for example, the memes are fun. And by the way, let me just address that.
Yep.
If we forget that wrestling was fun, we're quite indeed missing the point across the board. And I'm talking about not just from a competitive standpoint, but it's fun to be, let's say, it's fun to be a Hawkeye. And I guarantee you, from Scott and Rex Steiner, now the Steiner brothers in pro wrestling, but they feel the same way we do, and that their grounding, their background in the sport has only served them in the notoriety that they got from that in their careers since, whether it's in real estate or business or what have you.
Hmm.
And that's just two guys. I'm talking about a lot of guys. Lincoln McElravy in the hotel business has been exceedingly successful. There's one thing, one common denominator I've always noticed about wrestlers: hardworking, great employees, great business owners, and incredible community members. And all of that serves for a well rounded individual that can be a benefit, and it does reflect well on the sport that they came from. And that's so important to me. That's so important to me.
You touched a little bit there about, your absence from radio. Let's talk about what was your favorite, if there is one that comes to mind just off the top of your head. Your answer can be different tomorrow, but right now, the first thing that comes to mind, what was your favorite interview of any fighter or wrestler that you've ever done?
Oh my goodness sakes. There have been literally over 24, 25 years, have been thousands of them.
Yep.
Um, and I would say that probably um yeah, I can fall back on Gable because Gable always speaks the truth. I could fall back on Bobby Douglas. Jay Robinson has been phenomenal. Um, there are guys out there that I would expect to be natural leaders for our sport. They don't see their position, and maybe they're not comfortable being a natural leader for the sport. But quite frankly, I do. I believe that if you've risen to the top, not only do you owe it to the sport to be a leader, to be a proponent for it, but to be part of that marketing arm. It's not a difficult job to do. Believe me, it isn't. Tell your story, let folks hear about it, and hopefully instill some interest and some excitement about your sport. Tell that story to the general public. My goodness,
Hmm.
that's exactly what they want. They want to hear it. I've been involved in two different ESPN 30 for 30s, Isaiah Bird being one of the most requested ESPN 30 for 30s. There's a young man with no wheels, no legs at all, but he still gets out there and competes. He may not be able to compete and win against somebody with all legs, but Anthony Robles, I think, at Arizona State is a real good example of a guy who had a hindrance, if you will, a disability with only having one wheel, one leg, and still getting out there and beating his opponent, winning a national championship for Arizona State. And did they need that? You bet they did. And they hung their hat on him, and he was grateful for that opportunity to be the face of the program for so many years. And Anthony has become a very good friend. Um, and he doesn't see his disability as a disability; he sees it as a differing ability.
Mm.
And how refreshing is that in this day and age of Me Too, Me Too? No longer is it a problem. It's something that you can use to your advantage in many ways. Anthony Robles is a tremendous public speaker, coming right along as a color analyst for ESPN and others. I think, there are guys, and I'm going to miss a bunch.
That's all right. I
Uh,
just wanted to see if there's any that came, screaming off the top of the head. Gable would be a good one. Bobby Douglas, two
oh my
cycling
gosh,
legends.
yes. Yeah, and some of the guys get in trouble because they're not used to having a filter.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
That's what we
Huh?
that's it. That's what we want. That's what the people want. We want the honest, the real them. We don't want the
Right.
the cookie cutter, Good Morning America, right?
Right. Exactly. We want guys to speak from the heart. Too many times we're worried about hurting other people's feelings. One or two, we're worried about how the sport is going to view them. Are they going to be the Pat Downeys or the so-called bad boys of wrestling? However it comes out, it comes out.
Hmm.
Um, we don't want to be too staid, too boring. Wrestling is anything but boring.
Hmm.
Every match has not just subtle nuances, but moments of brilliance that you see when the light bulbs click on and a move actually goes from one to another. And you can see where that participant, whether it's male or female, you can see where that participant is sinking two or three steps ahead of where they currently are. Ben Askren was the best
Hmm.
at it, where he could plan out and you could see that natural progression. I hate to use the word flow for obvious reasons, but I
Shots
believe
fired.
that bang, bang.
Yeah.
I believe that there is some guys get it. Johnny Hendricks got it. He understood that there's a time and a place, but when it comes down to it, you got to get down, do your job, live up to the words that you've been speaking, and not just be a loudmouth, but somebody can actually back up their words. And I think that's totally cool and appropriate. I really do.
Yeah, we're all about shooting from the hip over here at StaleMates. So I love to see it. I think it works as long as you're honest and that's really who you are as a person. If you're not really that way and you try to shoot from the hip, it kind of comes off that way and you can pretty much tell those guys who are faking it and those guys who are actually, good at doing that. Um, let's bring it up to today's world. What's Scott Casber up to today? What do you got up your sleeve, Scott?
It's an interesting time because today, the date of the release of this Stalemates podcast, and you are calling it a podcast on YouTube, right?
Yeah, stalemate show, whatever you want to call it.
Stalemate show, and I love that. I've been sitting in your chair because you are my licensed barber du
Yep,
jour,
yep.
and
Barber to the
gratefully
stars.
so. Nobody hard parts me like you do, young man. But you and I have been talking for several years now. Back when I was with the Iowa Energy in my last go round as an announcer within the NBA structure, 35 years of doing basketball. Well, last year was my final year. I'm grateful for all that opportunity, but one of the things I got were the relationships out of it. And one of them was with you and a guy that you work with on a regular basis, the founder of Paramount Barber and Company, East Fifth and Walnut, downtown Des Moines, in the
Yep,
historic East Village.
that's right.
Parking, angle parking only. Thank you.
Bring your change.
Which I'm still fighting, by the way. I'm not a big angle parking guy,
Yeah.
especially when you got to back in. If you were able to pull in, it'd be a different story, it'd be a lot easier.
Hey, I don't make
But,
the rules. I just work them.
so having sold my company, uh, uh, and I'm not going to get into that, by the way. I really don't want to,
Hmm.
mainly because I think the past is the past. Now it's time to look forward to the future. I began to get this itch, and lots of sponsors, lots of listeners would come up to me wherever I'm eating dinner, lunch, whatever. Miss you on radio, miss you on TV, miss you in the sport. Well, I missed being in it as well. After spending a year away, I only realized how much I missed it.
Hmm.
And talking with you kind of solidified it. Watching you progress through stalemates, through whether it's just traditional postings that your greatest fan I think is your mother.
That's right.
She would send to me and watch them, and I think, my God, are you progressing quickly? You've wrapped your arms around it, much like I did early. And I had this idea that you would be a great co host. So, reinventing that which I already knew. I don't think I have much desire to do a national or an international TV show like we developed and were successful at. Um, I think the desire was to start radio again, only this time, and nobody else knows this except for a very few people, you included. This time, USA Takedown will be on ESPN.
Hmm.
My co host will be Zach Bogle, and I'm
Hey.
grateful that you took the opportunity to join me. Fridays, 9 to 11 a.m. Central Standard Time. We'll take a look, and a much deeper look, by the way, into the world of mixed martial arts and those guys that came from wrestling into MMA, and also our traditional coverage of wrestling. um, we're not controversy driven. We will cover controversial topics, but I believe that we can get to the very heart of the matter. The heart of the matter for me is the personalities that make up our sport. I find it fascinating to dive into the psyche of individuals, the coaches, what makes them tick, the relationships they form or don't form. And I think sometimes it would be very difficult for me to be a head coach of any program because I wouldn't want to see any of my guys leave.
Hmm.
Okay. I'd rather see a 50-year-old guy still putting on a USA singlet and getting out there and getting after it. But
Hmm.
realistically, I understand age does play a part. Jordan Burroughs has recently admitted that not only is his age playing a part, but he will stay at Lincoln until the 2021 season and then move to the Pennsylvania Regional Training Center with Brandon Slay, Roger Reyna and company. And Josh, by the way, Josh has been just terrific, the owner of the Philadelphia 76ers, and helping corral the other money guys into making sure a move like that would be successful for Jordan and Lauren and their three kids to move back closer to Jordan's birth home. He's been 15 years in Lincoln. Now's the time to rededicate, get closer, continue his pursuit of yet one more Olympic gold or a medal anyway. And I do believe it'll be gold. I don't think there's still anybody out there that can touch his natural God given ability, but he'll make that move. Will others follow? I think so. I think it's much easier in this day and age. Gable set the bar, by the way, in moving, leaving Iowa State, going to Iowa
Yeah, we don't like to
as
talk
a
about it too much.
huh?
I said I don't like to talk about it too much,
I
but
it's okay.
yeah.
It's okay.
People forget
But
though. People don't realize that he's still a Cyclone. They call him the greatest Hawkeye ever. He's still a
sure.
Cyclone. So
Yeah. Well, it depends on what day you ask, but he's a very proud former Hawkeye coach, holds incredible records in that regard. And that's something for every other coach to shoot for. John Smith, Pat Papalizio, Kevin Dresser. And by the way, a tip of the cap to Kevin Dresser, leaving Virginia Tech when he did, as he did, for the so called greener pastures of Iowa State. In a very short period of time, he took a 1-13 team, turned it around in a year, and made it respectable. Now that program, the Cyclones of Iowa State, aren't just respectable; they are national contenders in many ways, not just per weight, but for conference titles and national titles. So look out! The Cyclones of Iowa State are on track. You're seeing some changes being made across the country. Stanford, most notably lately, Stanford and then Old Dominion prior to that, announcing that they were going to be trimming their athletic departments for winter sports and non revenue sports. If they put the type of effort into those sports to make them revenue sports, I think you'd see um, a different view about that sport and other sports as well. So I'm not going to just say that they pick on wrestling because I think those days and that age has passed. But we have to look at what wrestling does. It puts 30 young ladies or more on campuses who are exceedingly smart, incredible athletes. And it turns out their performances on the mat, Archie Randall will tell you this at um, uh, down in Oklahoma. Uh, the former head coach of the Stars, he successfully put women's wrestling on that campus and was able to contend nationally right out of the box.
mm,
But look at what Grandview University is doing in Iowa. Nick Mitchell answers to a guy named Troy Plummer, and I've known that athletic director since for 20 plus years. And Troy, I made that phone call. I said, "When are you going to add women's wrestling?" He said, "Well, when should we?" I said, "As soon as possible." 2 weeks later, that's all it took. 2 weeks later for that athletic department and the president of the university to make the announcement that they indeed would add women's wrestling. They saw it as a benefit. Granted, they are an NEI program, but at the end of the day, it's still wrestling on a college campus, and it's still an opportunity for those young women to get a great education and then set their sights on national opportunities and international goals. And that is the ultimate of cool.
yeah, there's no doubt that you have your footprint on the sport of wrestling. What can we look forward to with the show? As you know, and but they might not know, this is my first time. It will be my first time on air. I've called you freaking out saying, you got to help me, Scott. Do you remember your first time on air?
I do. For this particular show, my old show, I should say, which will go unnamed for obvious reasons, but um, I remember my very first show. It was an hour-long show. I thought that would be enough, but after completing 1 hour, that first show with Dan Gable, I realized an hour wasn't nearly enough, to tell the story effectively, ask the right questions, elicit the right responses. And our show is basically a conversation. It's not a who wins, who loses, the points that were scored. Sure, that's part of it, but it doesn't have to be the end all be all.
Mm-hmm.
The interest for me, and generally speaking, the audience has spoken. The interest is in getting to know these athletes. So keeping that in mind, the friends that I've developed over the years have been calling, "Hey, when are you going to start doing this again? When are you going on the air?" Guys like Jeremy Stevens, Rashad Evans, a former UFC great, now with CBS Sports, is going to be joining us. Jeremy Stevens may have gotten knocked out in his last fight, but believe me, he's a favorite of Dana White and the UFC. I think he's going to be around for quite some time. The natural Randy Couture, my dear friend, who was pulled out of the hallway in seventh grade by my cousin, and he said, "Randy, you're going to wrestle." He said, "Okay, coach, what's that?" Well, now I think we know he knows what wrestling is. What's that? Answering that question, but he'll be joining us. Boss Root, one of my faves, the king of pancrase, also a host on Access TV. Chael Sonnen from ESPN, our old buddy, will be joining us. And we'll start the program off with Jordan Burroughs, whose
Let's
most
go.
recent news didn't necessarily shock the world, but remember, if you change that playground, you're going to see new playmates. New playmates help you expand your curriculum as an athlete and keeps things fresh. And let's face it, keeping things fresh as the world continues to evolve, so do you. If you don't, the world continues to evolve. You need to as well. Otherwise, sadly, you're going to miss the boat. You got to be able to Giangelo Hancock, by the way, is another addition to that very first show.
Mm,
What's interesting, it took about, I don't know, 4 days, 5 days. You were the recipient of all my texts, but all the guests for the first three shows are already booked.
mm.
And that tells you a little bit about the job we did. Don't have to convince these guys; they're lining up to be on the program to talk to you, and that's that fresh perspective. I like having a younger demo, i.e., that you represent. You find a lot of these young guys much easier to relate to than I might be able to.
I'm gonna try.
But at the same time, my job is radio, my job is promotion, and all these guys understand it. I have no axe to grind.
Mm,
John Jones may take my phone call and answer my questions, but at this point, he's on a bit of a media blackout, and that's okay. That's okay. He knows that I'm no danger. I'm not looking to, be an Ariel Hawani, and God love Ariel,
yeah.
but Ariel's committed to being on the show in the future as well. But we'll be getting some rather unique and albeit disparate points of view on what our sport is
Yep.
and how it's evolved through mixed martial arts. There was a time on my show, Dana White said he will do everything he can to kill the sport of wrestling within mixed martial arts.
Mm.
He denied that, so I rolled back the tape and played it for him.
You had the
Then
receipts.
he couldn't deny it, but the point was that he thought wrestling was boring in comparative analysis to, say, stand up, trading, hanging, and banging, and that's not necessarily the case. You have to look for the subtle nuances that make climbing the ladder and performing a ground and pound as so many did, whether it was Linland, Liddell, Ortiz, insert names of the greats here. One of my great friends, George St. Pierre, was able to take the best of so many different fighters, and pound per pound, I still think George St. Pierre, Rush as some call him, is one of the greatest fighters and one of those that contributes behind the scenes in teaching and enjoying passing on his knowledge.
Yeah.
A very humble guy, a wonderful guy. I've been on television with him on other shows, and he would do those shows as a friend to me, and know that he would be comfortable. We did an hour. I'll go back a few years. We did an hour on Access TV back then, HDNet, on a TV show called Inside MMA on HDNet. I told the producer Daryl, I said, Daryl, we should do an hour-long special on college wrestling's impact on the world of mixed martial arts. Well, took about a month or so. He called me up, and I thought he was just scheduling me to come back out to LA
Hmm.
to be a part of Inside MMA on HDNet with Kenny and Boss and Ron Kruk. And he said, no, 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 I don't want you to come to California. We're coming to Iowa.
Mm,
He had already set everything up. We went to the Hawkeye Museum. It was set up like a television studio. And we had the guys I was able to secure were included Guy Mesger, Dan Gable sat next to me to my left, um, Kenny, then Boss, and Pat Militich, who I respect until the cows come home. Pat and I have done so much together in the world of broadcast. He is so talented and so talented and smart. Let's face it, when you got a guy like Joe Rogan that can really extol that which they know firsthand, it makes that commentary that much easier to understand and it educates us all. And the more educated the fan is, whether it's wrestling, mixed martial arts, Muay Thai, Jiu-Jitsu, or what have you, I think we're in a better place. The sport, it's no wonder it's grown so much because we've taught the public, and pardon me for rambling on,
You're
we've
good.
taught the public more than they ever thought they would know. And it's guys like, I'm going to use a guy named Guy Sacco. Guy Sacco at Defense Soap has been a great friend to our program. We've been a good friend for him as well as he grew his company. After 30 years, he retires from the Cleveland Police Department and continues his Defense Soap efforts to where it's now a multi-million dollar company, but he did it for a reason. He wanted his athletes to be healthy and able to compete. And you can't compete when you have skin-borne disease,
That's
whether
right.
it's impetigo or whatever the skin disease is. His products answer that call and help the athletes maintain an ability to be out there and there, there's not a high level athlete that's willing to sit on the sideline and lament his inability to not be on the mat and competing. He wants to be a part of that effort. And that's the hallmark, I think, of a great athlete. I want to go back to stalemates. One
Yeah.
thing that you're doing that is so much fun is you're having fun, and that comes across in spades
Thank you.
in your podcast on YouTube. The YouTube channel is a great platform for you. Having you involved with the new show on ESPN, I think is going to be a remarkable opportunity for our fans to get that young, aggressive, and not afraid to have fun point of view that you've had because you're seeing the other side of it. You're a fan for sure. You're well connected for sure. People are. I mean, I don't know what your Pat Downey. I understand that went 30 some or 40 some thousand hits
No big
on the
deal.
Pat Downey
You can say
story.
you can say that again louder.
How much was it in 30, 40,000?
Yeah,
I
who's
think that's
counting?
remarkable.
Who's counting 30,000 views? I don't know. I'm not counting. No, I
Clicks,
appreciate
views.
that.
By the way, follow Stalemates. Would you
Yeah,
please
at StaleMates
click on
Show.
there, add it, follow it, like it, leave a comment. Zach reads them all, and I hear about all of them. So people ask why and how did you pick Zach Bogle? Because he was aggressive. He understood the power of the medium. He understood that wrestlers now, very different, by the way, than when we started 20 some years ago. Wrestlers weren't comfortable being interviewed. Coaches did not have the toolbox that they have now to be interviewed with, and they're more comfortable. They understand it's an opportunity to promote themselves, their programs, their athletes, and their ultimate desires to get out there and be a commodity themselves.
Yeah.
There wasn't a wrestling coach in the country that was making over $100,000 a year when we started, and there were very few at that anywhere close. Now it's become a norm. It's a power bar that most wrestling coaches aspire to, and we're grateful for that, Zach. And I know you are too. Your listeners, your viewers, those that follow you on social, are really voting with their subscriptions, and it's a cool way for us to be able to connect to an even different demo, and we are I think we're banned to not embrace a younger demo.
Yeah.
So our show, USA, will be a program that will talk to anybody and everybody. It will be a caller driven show in that we will at times invite callers to participate, but more than anything, it will be a general interest in that we will have on the guests that people want to listen to.
Yeah.
And that's key. I want their words more than mine to be heard. And Zach, I think you do too, but I also want your perspective and the questions that are asked. You'll sit back and listen to the responses, be able to form the next questions based on the responses they've given. And 2 hours fly by. And for ESPN to believe in us enough and their knowledge to put us on a Friday morning, 9 to 11 a.m. Central Standard Time, Our home base station of 1350 KRNT here in Des Moines, Iowa, is our launching pad. But we will be able to take, and we have a silent partner as well. We'll just call him Joshua at this point. I think you're going to be able to see a program that'll take the next step, because it takes more than one guy. It takes even more than two guys, because there's a lot of moving parts that need to be managed daily, weekly, monthly, yearly in order to make a program successful.
Yep.
And I know you're going to be talking about it periodically on Stalemates, and we'll talk about Stalemates as well on the USA show. But the whole idea is that we've got to be prepared to help each other. We can't be a company that's new to the market and then piss everybody else off.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm not going to insert the name of any company here. You can't be a standalone and come along and try to excise everybody else from covering the sport. First of all, it's bad for the sport. Secondly, it's very selfish indeed, a company that would do that. Believe me or not, that their opinions matter very little, if at all, as do mine.
Yep.
My opinions really don't matter. Okay. That's something you have to realize early on. I know very, very little compared to the athletes, coaches, and fans that we interview. And that's key. Understanding that, admitting it, is part of the battle.
Yeah.
I am so excited
I'm
on
excited
August
too.
7th when we hit the air.
I think that you and me, both different eras, so we'll agree on stuff, we'll disagree on stuff.
Sure.
And I think that's what's going to make the show interesting. I'm super excited to do it. Um, I don't know if you know this, but when I was in high school, I had a teacher that had us write out we had to do this thing called a job report where we had to say, what we wanted to do. And I picked
All right.
radio host. And then you spend the next month researching that job. Everything that I read said, Zach, don't do it. And so for me to be able to finally be able to do that, I'm excited. I've been trying to do that my whole life, doing stuff that people tell me not to do. So I really appreciate you. I appreciate you coming on the show. I appreciate
Absolutely.
the opportunity that you're going to provide for me. I'm excited. August 7th is going to be a big deal. We're going to put it out on all of our platforms and, get it out to everybody that's listening over here at StaleMates. I'm super excited to announce it. Can you say one more time before we wrap it up how they can hear it
Sure.
and everything?
USA Takedown will air on ESPN, in statewide 1350 KRNT Friday morning, 7 to 11 Central Standard Time, an average of 5 to 6 guests per show. It'll star Zach Bogle, yours truly. When I say star, we're using that term lightly, because we are mainly a conduit for the general public and for an opportunity for us to get the point across of what's going on in the sport. It may not seem like there's a lot going on in the sport right now due to the magic that is COVID 19. And by the way, my broker told me when it hits 20, sell.
Okay.
I don't know if you also noticed, a recent study came out from the scientists who are studying this terrible disease, that it will live up to 3 days on a toilet seat, which
Okay.
is 2 days longer than Elvis. So I
Okay.
just wanted to throw that out there. Is that too soon? Too soon for that?
I don't, sure.
That's kind of that's the kind of lowbrow humor you might hear from me, but all my comedic buddies in the world of stand-up comedy. Greg Warren, by the way, will be joining us in the future. Well-known touring national comedian, former wrestler from the University of Missouri, will be joining us, and we're going to do everything we can to not just educate, but entertain and inform the general public. And Zach, I think I picked the right guy this time, and I'm really looking forward to the addition of you and your attitude. Whether you wear a Mickey Mouse shirt to the radio station or not, I don't care. Come
Okay.
as you are. Bring your opinions with you and bring the conversation I know you and I have. I can't wait to make it public. I'm looking forward to it.
All right, Scott. Thank you for joining me. Don't forget to comment, like, subscribe at Stalemate Show at all the social medias. Thanks for watching.